Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast, where we talk with early-stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Hey there. Today we're chatting with Aaron Filous, who's the founder and CEO of Promotable. Promotable does education and workforce acceleration for data analytics, Python, and all other things data science related. They've got some physical locations, been doing a lot online since COVID. They do a bunch of events, both in person and virtual. Aaron talked to us about that, plans for growth, some of his biggest wins, biggest losses. We spend a fair bit of time talking about what it looks like to build and grow an education company and what the value of those topics in particular, data analytics and data science, are to a workforce today. Hopefully you find this enjoyable. If you do, go find Aaron online and find Promotable online and tag them and say that you enjoyed listening to the episode. And thank you so much for listening.
This episode is brought to you by Full Stack PEO. Most founders start companies because they figured out a better way to solve a problem or serve a need, not because they love tracking payroll, filling out compliance forms, and explaining employee benefits packages. And yet, all that stuff still has to be done. That's why there's Full Stack PEO. Full Stack PEO specializes in turnkey HR for emerging companies, not just those core services, but advice and expertise that help founders maximize employee potential. Curious? Find out more at fullstackpeo.com.
Hey there. Today we're chatting with Aaron Filous, who's the founder and CEO of Promotable. Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Why don't we start with a quick pitch for Promotable?
Sure. So Promotable, we're a workforce accelerator that closes employer skill gaps and prepares professionals for high-growth careers in the digital economy. The course is in data analytics and Python programming.
And what does workforce accelerator mean? Sounds like you might be an online school, but that doesn't really jive with workforce accelerator. So break that down a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So online school is one way of putting it. Really, our goal is to, I'd say, put people in a position to be successful. Thinking back, looking at kind of the education system at large, we learn a lot of things in college, for me in grad school, things that, aren't super applicable to the careers we end up in. And then, I just jump into the story here, but one of the reasons I started Promotable was because a lot of the current solutions that I found weren't really solving the problem that I was looking for. And for me, it was, I thought it was really important to learn data analytics in particular, but not just to learn it, right? I think that's one of the things that I found in school where they're like, learn hard skills, learn these things, but they don't tell you why. In my case, it wasn't just that I wanted to learn it, but I was a relatively early employee at a startup in San Francisco, kind of standard story, but I'm not technical. And so, I always had this issue of, if I ever needed to pull something that wasn't on our CRM or on Salesforce or wherever, I had to go and ask an engineer. That can become tedious and really becomes a block to being successful. And so I was saying that, when I was at that first startup, this was a constant challenge where I would have to go on and say, okay, well, we have this information. It's not in our CRM, it's not in Salesforce. Pull it from the back end, give me a CSV, and I would do this once a week at least, if not more frequently. And then, after doing this for a couple of years, you realize, hey, there must be a class for someone like me. In this case, I was an operations manager. Similar situations apply for my friends who are in marketing or in finance. You want to kind of move beyond Excel and be able to work with your technical teams and be a little more dependent, do some of these things by yourself. And so that's what I was really looking for. And when I went to go look for a class, it was, either become a data scientist in 12 weeks or become a software engineer in 12 weeks, like classic coding bootcamp. Or the other options were things like intro to data science, which also weren't particularly helpful because they were just, kind of intros and feeder courses. And I wanted something that would help me add that context, but basically learn enough data to get better at my job to be successful. And that's kind of how we create Promotable to help tailor that experience. So if you're, in the marketing space and you're like, hey, I'm a marketing manager, I want to learn enough data to get better at my job or, to apply to new roles, how do I take these hard skills and kind of mold them to my role, right? Rather than just generically learning it, it's I want to learn what I need to do for marketing, or in my case, it was for operations. And that's what I think, in terms of a workforce accelerator, right, there's a lot of things where, you'll see a lot of like research papers, and companies are coming out and saying, hey, actually, a lot of the skills we're looking for, we're not actually getting from graduates, right? I think something like 65% or so, don't quote me exactly on that number, but it's a very large number of companies will come out and say, we actually want our candidates to have analytics skills. They don't mean data scientists, but they want you to be able to make data-driven decisions, to look at the information you have and make a decision based on facts, right? I think the statistic I saw, it was about like 22 or 23% of schools said that their graduates came out with those skills. So a huge mismatch. And then looking again at a lot of the data-specific roles that are open, a lot of them aren't for data scientists. They are for marketers or product managers or finance people. All these like functional roles that you need to have, or that they're looking for someone with a data background. And that's really the way I see a workforce accelerator versus something else.
And so then what do classes, or what does programming look like for at least this first batch of kind of data science and Python? What's my experience if I'm a user of Promotable?
Yeah, so if you're a user of Promotable, so you'll sign up. We are our main data analytics course. It's an 8-week course. That's about 5 hours a week in the evening. So it's geared towards someone who is already working, who you've probably been working for a couple of years. You might be a marketing analyst or a manager, and you're thinking, okay, well, what's next? I want to level up, whether it's at my company or maybe I want to go work at a different company. And so the first question that I like to ask, I think, is the most important question anyone can ask when looking at any sort of education product, right? It's why am I doing this? And when you have that goal in mind, then you're really able to leverage all of that skill building, all of working with, in our case, all of our instructors who are all current practitioners, and you're able to put yourself in a position where, okay, I'm doing this to get this goal. And you're really able to then focus on that versus just kind of muddling through. In our case, like, I'd probably have a conversation with you. I would tell you about, of course, all of our instructors and mentors. But most importantly, I think a lot of people, myself included, right? I have lots of really expensive pieces of paper from brand name universities. And, I think to me, that's less important than being able to show that these skills. It's like I've seen lots and lots of resumes that list, 3 lines deep of technologies, and that doesn't tell me much, right? Where for me, it's like if you want to go, work on the marketing team at Starbucks, your final work product, which is like your final project, but I call it a work product because I think it's specifically something that one should be focused on creating so that you have something to use down the road, versus like when we were in college, you had these projects that you did, you got your A, you moved on, you're never going to use them again. In this case, I want you to be able to show that recruiter or that boss that you understand data in the context of their business. So if you wanted to go and get that job at Starbucks in the marketing team, maybe you would use U.S. coffee consumption statistics or store openings or some sort of coffee related data that you could pull. Lots of publicly available sources. Some folks in our classes will use data from their companies, of course, with their company's permission or their boss's permission. But the whole goal is to say, okay, well, let me show you this tool. Let me show you these charts and this dashboard that I created, showing data in the context of your business. And then from there, you go through and you learn the meat and potatoes. So you learn how to query, you learn how to use SQL to query databases. You learn how to use things like Tableau to do some data visualization. And even our data analytics class, one thing that we've found is one of those things where you can't just create something and say, okay, this is the best thing ever, right? You have to really go out and talk to industry. And so we go out and talk to data scientists, hiring managers, directors, all the time. And so much of that is because I want to make sure that our curriculum is both top notch, but we're actually filling those skill gaps. So my only question is, what do people not have? And how do I put that into my course? And that's why we also started adding a little bit of Python as well, because we've noticed that analysts or even people who aren't going to be data scientists or what have you, it's important to, at bare minimum, understand what it is and be able to do some of the basic analysis, leveraging some of those tools. So you'll go through that track. You'll work with our instructors, who I mentioned are all practitioners. So they're all in data science or data analytics related roles at companies like we've had Grubhub, Groupon, Trunk Club, who else? Discover. People who have, Nielsen, people do this every single day, because I think that's one of the most important things that someone can get from taking a class like this. Because it's one thing for someone to say, like we had a lot often in school, like this is how it's supposed to be. But if you've never really done it before, that's a challenge, right? And so if you can say, hey, well, I did this morning. Here's how we work with our marketing teams, or here's how this is the most important elements of data that you need to work on. And so really able to have those kinds of really important conversations and add in the context from someone who's been there. And then at the end of the 8 weeks, of course, you will walk away with that work product. And of course, you have the certificate and that sort of thing. But most importantly, you've got something you can leverage to work on that next opportunity, and you've already had that conversation. So you're in a position to really be successful and position yourself to have a better outcome.
So hit us with some current status for the company overall. Any sort of vanity metrics you want to share? It can be number of instructors, number of students who've gone through, revenue, fundraising, anything and everything that you're open to sharing.
Sure. So instructors, and we have a pretty deep pool of instructors. One thing that we also do that I haven't really mentioned, and this is part of the way we connect with industry as well, is we host over 50 events and workshops every year. Sometimes it's got to the point where it's every single week, sometimes twice a week. And really, this is an opportunity for us to create a forum for someone to come in and learn, whether that's demystifying data with someone. We've had really cool data scientists from GoGo who talked about what machine learning is, right? And I think for so many of us, it's really, we want to understand, of course, what data is, but how it impacts us, how it impacts our role. What's an insight? How do we, turn data into, things that drive revenue? So we're able to have like those kinds of conversations. So we bring in people from, different industries, different functions, and all data related. And so we're able to really have those like really deep conversations, and we keep them informal. So you can show up and you can talk to someone from an e-commerce company or a CPG company or hard tech company and see kind of how those conversations happen. So as I mentioned, we have over 50 events a year. All of our instructors are just like that. They're all practitioners. So a lot of our instructors and speakers, sometimes someone can't commit to teaching for 8 weeks, but they really enjoy mentoring. They really enjoy talking to people and ultimately kind of cutting through some of the buzzwords, but helping people make data-driven decisions. Through those workshops and events, we've got a community that's about 8,000 people, give or take. In terms of revenue, we're in the high six figures. So, end of 2019. So this year, we're hoping to continue that positive trend and kind of take it from there. Then, of course, we've worked with, I've named a couple companies, but, maybe a few more, we've worked everything from, of course, we have our individual classes. Then we also have more corporate training or group sessions. And, we work with like some Fortune 500 companies. Right now, we're talking to a potential university partner as well about doing a course for them. So really, we've got a couple irons in the fire, but ultimately, we're really trying to fill this space that I think really isn't really being addressed, and that's people, probably I assume like you and me. I think about it as like data for everyone, and we want to continue to building that out.
And then I'm kind of interested, what's been the impact of COVID on Promotable? Have you seen an increase, a decrease, about the same? How has that affected enrollment?
Yeah, so I would say that, obviously in March, when everyone thought the world was falling, we obviously saw a decrease, like a lot of people, and then now it's totally turned around. So we're seeing a lot more interest, people reaching out and asking about what's next, what kind of classes we have. We've been on, we're built for, we'll say, a digital economy or even a virtual economy. We've been offering not just like online, since March, but we've had an online option almost since we started Promotable. And part of that was because we had a lot of people who are really interested in leveling up, learning more. But everyone works, right? So it's like, hey, I really want to take this class, but I work late on Thursdays, right? Or whatever the day was. So we'll say, okay, well, so we would always record the session, put it on Zoom, and then we always offer that recording to all of our students so that if you miss something, you can always, or you just want to rewatch it and go over it one more time, you can always go back and watch that the next day or on Saturday or maybe in a couple of weeks if you want to go back and go over that topic. But I think the most important thing we want to stress is I think live training is really important. I think you lose so much when you're just watching a video because you're not able to ask those questions. But also, it's nice to be able to go back and look at some of those sessions so you can say, oh, what was that thing we talked about? I remember something about it, but I really want to dive deeper into it. We have that option.
Aaron, do you have any swag that is your swag of choice for Promotable? Anything you hand out to like students, instructors, team members? What do you guys do?
Right now, we're in the process of getting our first swag, which I think is, speaking of milestones, that's an important one. So of course, your standard T-shirts, that sort of thing. But what I really like, I love hoodies. A good, comfortable hoodie is like something that I think obviously it looks cool. I'm also very comfortable. I still wear mine from my old companies, and so we're going to be getting some of that pretty soon.
Nice. I'm a big fan of the hoodie as well. Well, for those of you out there looking to get your hoodie for your startup company, you can go to fuelmerchandise.com. And if you mention Startup Competitors, you'll get 10% off your first order. So when you think of competition for Promotable, who or what comes to mind?
I'm sure as you know, there's lots of competition, and as someone who, I think competition keeps us good. It's what makes everything work well, and you want to make sure that you're staying on top of things and continuing to innovate and ultimately delivering value for your clients. For us, I'd say we compete with a lot of the kind of master's degrees or that sort of thing. They're substantially more expensive than we are, and I think the biggest differentiator is also your master's degrees. Like any college, right, it's a lot more theory heavy, where for us it's very practical. Someone wants something very specific. They want to get better in their job, and they want to get that from someone who has been there. I think that's the other differentiator between a bigger, more academic-focused institution and Promotable. Of course, also a lot of the at your own pace courses. So your MOOCs, things like Udemy and Coursera and that sort of thing. And again, I think those are good places to start. I always encourage people to look at that. I always love when I see people who want to learn and to really invest that time. But again, I think it gets to a point, and I've watched my fair share of videos, and I say, okay, that's really cool. I want to learn more, or I have a question. How did you get there? Why does this make sense? Or I see why that makes sense for what you're talking about, but how does that impact what I do? And so then from there, that's where I think we're able to really fill in that gap.
So I guess when somebody's going down that initial journey and they're thinking about, let's say I just want to get better at, either the basics of interpreting data or, but even just looking at what are some of the options out there, how do you think about that buyer's journey? And then how do you, when you're thinking about how you're going to get them on a Promotable, how do you either target them specifically from a customer acquisition perspective or differentiate from those other options to bring them on board? Or do you say, no, go do that. Do the 1 week Udemy course. And if you love it, then you're going to totally love Promotable. And that's the right next step. I just love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point, and oftentimes that's what we'll say, because I think it's ultimately my biggest, like, the thing that's the most important to me is that I want to make sure that like someone's getting real value, so they know what they're looking for. They have an idea, like, hey, I'm looking to get to this point in my career, and then we can say, well, let me tell you how Promotable can help you get there, versus someone who's like, I think I want to learn this, but I'm not really sure. Usually, once you go through one of those free courses, then you have all these questions. A lot of our clients come in with real pain points. Not all of them are ready to start running SQL queries. One of the things that we started doing about, I'd say a year and a half ago, is we ran something we called Data Jumpstart. And this is, you would expect us to start, launching into Python coding and these kinds of things. But for a lot of people, just diving into Excel can be challenging, can be intimidating. If you've never, seen 50,000 rows of data, you're like, well, what do I do with this? And so we actually created a short, really accessible, inexpensive workshop that was delivered in person pre-COVID. Now it's delivered online, but still live. And we go through that data-driven process, right? So it's not just about learning how to code. It's not just about learning how to use tools. Really, it's a mindset and it's a framework. And so we talk about, okay, well, you have this data set. Now let's explore this data set. What's here? If we're using a Superstore data set, we'll say, okay, well, let's see how many, office supplies were sold or what regions things were sold. And you can see how many different kinds of things there are. And then we start to construct, okay, what are the outputs we're looking for? We want to learn how, what sales look like. We want to see which region has the highest percentage of what kind of item. And then we work on your first pivot table. And then from there, we use, we'll do things like we'll show people how to use slicers, link all those pivot tables together onto a dashboard that self-automates. So you can self-updates rather. So if you have that drop down, you can say, okay, show me all of the sales from California by salesperson A. And you're able to do that on a dashboard that you've made yourself, that you can always use again for almost any business. And for a lot of people, a lot of small businesses, really that's what they need to really just start learning about how do you drill deeper into your data. And then, from there, if you're one of those companies you're in finance or you're in, a different e-commerce and you have millions and millions of data points or, hundreds of thousands of data points, that's when you really need to start looking at other solutions like whether it's a SQL database or something else. And so that's actually been really well received. A lot of folks are like, oh, I feel so much more confident being able to look at this. And now I have much better questions to ask. And they're able to really get a lot more. And then from there, that's a good way of then taking that next step. Our events are kind of a similar thing, where someone will come in, they'll learn, they'll say, oh, this is actually really cool. I think this is really relevant, or this really resonates with me, or I really want to dive deeper. And now I understand where I can take this. And I understand, I have like all these questions and these pain points. And I know that, hey, if I solve this problem, if I'm able to get a little bit better here, I can save 5 hours a week. Or I can automate this task that's been taking me this much time every week. Or I could win more meetings by using a data visualization tool like Tableau to showcase those insights. And that's kind of how we have that conversation and help people on their journey.
What are the primary ways that you get customers today? Is it word of mouth, those events that you run, pay-per-click? How do folks find you?
So right now it's a lot of word of mouth. Of course, our events, of course, help because when you have, ultimately we don't do any hard selling. We of course do a 30-second intro about Promotable, and then we let our speakers take it from there. And we're just talking about all kinds of different topics. And at the end of the day, we think that is the best way to deliver the most value for everyone. And then if someone says, oh, this is really cool, I think this is helpful, I want to go deeper, then we talk about, of course, all of our class offerings and that sort of thing, and take it from there. We don't do very much paid marketing. So we do very, very little Google AdWords. We almost do zero. I think part of it is there's only so much, I think we're flooded with this kind of stuff. You go onto Facebook, I go onto LinkedIn, I get LinkedIn messages all the time from people telling me to complete my degree. I have 2 degrees. I don't need to, go to Strayer University. They like to LinkedIn mail me every month or so. And so, I think from, being able to do some of the work up front and show that value, I think is a really good way of helping people along that journey versus just like throwing out a Google AdWord or spending on Facebook ads or what have you.
When you think about the kind of product roadmap for Promotable and all the different things that could mean, right? Product roadmap for you could mean tools and technology that you offer down the road. It could just mean different types of courses and content. How do you think about that in your mind when you look at this business 3 to 5 years from now? What does it look like?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. And, before March, I would have said we're looking at a couple of different, physical locations and this and that. I think now we're really looking at, of course, a much more robust online platform. I think I see a huge value in live learning. I don't think we'll ever go away from that. I think 3 to 5 years from now, I think we'll definitely have a suite of at your own pace videos and courses as well to augment. So I think that's always helpful to say, okay, well, now we've learned all this stuff. Maybe for homework, go through some of these things, or as you're thinking about what works and what doesn't for you, or what's most helpful, dive into some of these specific things, and then come back with real questions for your instructor. Of course, once we can go back to doing in-person stuff, we're definitely going to be looking at other markets. Right now we're in Chicago and DC, looking at San Francisco, of course, and really just expanding from there. Because our cost model is pretty low. We're able to really, we don't have a physical office space, right? We work out of our accelerator, co-working partners, and when it makes sense to have a physical office, then maybe we'll get there. But given COVID, who knows? I think, of course, we'll continue to offer our online products, and then go into more verticals. I think we're looking eventually at we focus on personalized learning and making sure that data you can learn. In our case, data to help you at your job. So we'll be looking at really customizing for some functions, particular verticals, and then last but not least, we're also going to be starting to address some of the gaps that I think a lot of the data science boot camps and the coding boot camps have open. I think we've started to see income share agreements and this sort of thing. So we'll be going down that route, launching next year, and then kind of taking it from there. But it's all built on this platform that Promotable is growing. This community of instructors, everyone who attends our workshops, communicating with industry leaders. Ultimately, we have this platform where we're continuously feeding in information and understanding, what do employers need, what is, what we don't need as much of anymore, right? Or how do we take this kind of these foundation or building blocks and really add that extra component that makes it so much more valuable. So we're just going to be continuing to dive into that sort of stuff, and then of course continuing to build out our B2B corporate solutions as well.
I probably should have asked you this one before we started recording, just to give you an option to direct me here. But at least for the markets that you're in, are you aware of any incentives that you're working with, like the state or federal government or anything under the CARES Act around particular reimbursement incentives for employers or for like specific classes of employees? Like I know that I think it's in the CARES Act, there's stuff around retired military members going for technical training, things like that. Do you know, are you guys set up for any of that?
So we don't do any of that now. We've had a couple of conversations. We've been reached out to a couple of times from specifically some organizations that work with veterans that are transitioning out of their military roles into tech training roles. So I think Shift.org is one. There's a few more that we've started having some of those preliminary conversations. But right now we're not working with any like either federally funded or otherwise funded or subsidized programs yet. I know some of those exist out there, and so we're having those conversations and trying to make sure, trying to see if we're a good fit for that kind of thing. Of course, I always like to try and find a win-win solution. We do that already with a lot. I'd say probably a third of our students, give or take, come in with either an employer like partial reimbursement, either on the back end or up front as well. Because ultimately, when someone's taking these kinds of classes, we're not just doing it for fun. We're doing it because we want to get better at our jobs for our employers. So oftentimes we're able to find those win-win solutions where it's like, hey, I'm going to invest in you, and then you're going to become that much better for us. And I think that's always a good opportunity.
Nice. What's your biggest win since starting Promotable? What's the thing that you're either proudest of, or the thing that you think you've learned or internalized that has been the most impactful?
It's very hard to put one in. I think as a first time founder, there are so many things that you learn, and I think on the one hand, it's like you think that it feels like you're doing it yourself, but there's we have all this infrastructure. I have a lot of mentors that I work with. They've been really helpful. But, I think your first win is that first piece of revenue, right? That when that starts to tell you, oh, actually there is validation in this, that it's not just like, I think this isn't really is a skill gap, but actually it's something that is real that other people feel as well. That's always, really empowering. And then, even like after that first class, when we had people came back and said, Aaron, this was really helpful. I'm getting interviews that I never got before. or, this like kind of changed my outlook. It's really humbling when you have people who are like, oh, this is really cool. This is actually really helpful for me. That's really amazing. And then kind of going on from there, I mean, we did a training, last year for a Fortune 500 company. These are things that you don't really think about or expect. And they reached out to us. And so that's something that is really interesting. Then, most recently we, got our first in-print media mention, right? So we just got into Chicago Magazine. So that's really cool. I could tell you that's the first time I ever paid full price for a magazine in my life. It's like $7 for a magazine. Oh my God. So I think there's a couple of milestones. And I think you have to, when you're starting anything, really, something I've learned, something I should have or wish I learned, earlier on in my career, but something you definitely realize when you're founding a company and trying to build something, you have to celebrate the small wins. When you have to really kind of build that track record, and every next step is a win as long as you're going in the right direction.
What's the flip side of that? What's your biggest challenge that you faced so far in launching this company?
Biggest challenge is just really making sure that we continue to, it sounds cheesy, but innovate and make sure that we're continuing to add value. Some of my conversations when I talk to guest speakers, I talk to a lot of people who are, not just entry level, but director level, manager level, hiring manager. And my biggest question is, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing when you're hiring people? What skills are you looking for? What do you think what's the next thing that you think is really helpful, or that you think is missing from your team that you wish more people had? These kinds of things, and being able to continuously add that into your coursework to make sure that I started this to make sure that education helps put people in a position to be successful, right? We're not just learning to get a piece of paper, but we're learning to advance our careers, or we're learning to, get better at whatever we want to get better at. And we want to make sure that we're doing that. I think that's something that in education, I think sometimes gets lost a little bit. And I want to make sure that that's remains at our core.
Nice. All right. If folks want to learn more about Promotable, or if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So if folks want to find more about us, we have our website, www.promotable.io. We also have a YouTube channel for anyone who wants to see all of our events, see all of our guest speakers. Basically, just go into YouTube and Google Promotable Data Analytics. We'll definitely come up. And then anyone who wants to email us, they can email me. They send an email or a note to hello@promotable.io. I'll see that and follow up.
Excellent. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Me too. Thanks so much for having me.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.